So welcome.
Good to see you again, Alan.
Yeah, a long time.
Indeed, yeah.
How have you been?
Good, very good. So looking forward to getting started, let's say, on the journey.
And we're diving into episode two. So in episode two, I think it's a very logical starting point for any channel oriented around the spiritual, which is really just to define through the lens of those who have been experiencing it, what it means to be on a spiritual journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was one of the essences of what we were talking about and wanting to communicate, to reach out, let's say, to those who are part of, well, for want of a better term, the awakening process that's quite clearly happening on the planet. Why it's happening and why it's accelerating so much, I think, is again, already we open a door to another topic for another episode. But actually, what does it mean to be on a spiritual journey, and what is the spiritual journey? I think is a very, very important question, especially for people who have started the spiritual journey or made certain steps on the spiritual journey, and maybe have questions about integrating the spiritual and the material.
Okay, so why don't we start there? So maybe as cleanly and succinctly as possible, what would you say is a spiritual journey? What would somebody who's on a spiritual journey, what would their life look like different, for example, from somebody who is not on a spiritual journey?
Succinctly, the only difference is our perception of that journey.
Okay.
This is how simply I see it. In real terms, every single one of us, every single soul incarnated on this planet is on a spiritual journey. Whether they've awoken to it or not, whether they're still, let's say, caught in the matrix or caught in this illusory nature of Maya, whether their predominance is towards fulfilling certain material needs and they don't really have such an interest in the spiritual dimension or the spiritual aspect of the journey, it's still the same essence. It's still the same, we can refer to it as the soul, which is part of that, which is the center of that human experience.
So that's to say that everyone's on a spiritual journey. The only deciphering point is whether they realize it or not.
Whether they realize it or not, but realizing it or not basically just means where you are on your journey, how far along you are on your journey.
Yeah, so that you've reached a point of realization.
Exactly. You've reached a point of realization of a certain awakening. Another question is what triggers that awakening?
Whole another conversation.
A whole nother conversation. Yeah.
It's not coming from here, in my opinion.
It's, yeah, exactly. It's coming from somewhere, but how we experience it in our day-to-day life experience
Yeah. So
is normally coming with something that shakes us.
okay, so then I'll refine the question a little bit further and see if we can just be a little bit more, I don't know, I guess more obvious with it. So if everybody is on a spiritual journey, but many are unaware that they're even on that spiritual journey, how would you define the lifestyle or the life lived of those who are aware or believe themselves to be on a spiritual journey? What would be unique about those incarnations?
Generally, I observe that what you find is those people are more self-connected,
That's where I was thinking as well.
and also with becoming more self-connected, they're actually more concerned about, we could say, collective humanitarian needs rather than just purely individual needs.
Yeah, and that's ultimately the way I see it, that the unconscious self is motivated by the material and the journey outward. The conscious self is motivated by the non-physical and the journey inward.
Inward, yeah. In which, if we let's throw something out there, like how we both have read the law of one. So when they speak about those, the two dimensions of the path, they speak about service to self or service to others.
Yeah, also known as the me frequency or the we
The
frequency.
me or the we frequency, yeah, or selfishness or selflessness.
Yeah, the concern for the greater good, the collective, and those around you, or the concern for just self and self-motivated needs.
Exactly. And that's in a way one of the defining characters of a spiritual journey and of a spiritual path is actually becoming conscious of making the beneficial choices. And those beneficial choices are not always the easiest choices and are also very often sacrificing certain lesser individual needs. So the greater good of the collective also actually serves your own personal greater good.
Yeah, you're saying it's a source of joy insofar as you know that you're helping those beyond yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. And many people feel that calling. It's one of the first things I observe in people that when that soul awakening takes place, that the first instinct or the first desire that comes from that is that they want to share it. They want to share that joy, that beauty of that experience, that new perception of reality with as many people as possible.
Yeah, love spills over.
Exactly. Love flows. Yeah. When the cup is overflowing, then it offers abundance to everybody.
Yeah, because love spills over. So if there's a lot of self-love and there's a lot of joy in the way that you're living, you're naturally going to emanate that joy into the people around you.
Yeah,
Whereas when there's a lack of love with self in the journey that you're on, you're going to be drawing or taking from those around you to fulfill what it is that's lacking.
absolutely. And honestly, there are people that are somewhere we could say in that gray area, sometimes in between, let's say, a purely material um, perception upon life and material interest in life, and spiritual interest in life, where actually they try to make spiritual business. The focus in spirituality is also business rather than
Yeah, which really just means that they're still on the material end of things. They're just using the spiritual as a content source or a revenue source.
a revenue source. Which now, of course, there's nothing wrong being supported through the good and beneficial activities you do on the spiritual path. Each stage on the spiritual journey is really about becoming more and more aware of your own intention, and your own motivation. The why is such an important question.
Hmm. As in, like, why is it that you're moving down this path, or why is it that you're feeling this call?
Yeah, why are you doing what you're doing? What is the purpose?
Yeah, well, if you're really true to yourself and you're moving down this path, I would argue that the goal is one of harmony with the consciousness that's resident within you, which is to say the will of to see yourself through the eyes of your higher self would be the goal, which is operating through the consciousness beyond the human experience and allowing that to naturally flow through everything that is your human self. I
And
think
if
that,
we put that into the framework of the spiritual tradition, that's essentially what they speak about in the idea of self-realization.
yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, the human experience is a very temporary one, but there's an eternal aspect that is resident and compiled within this human experience. And so, if we think about this journey, the unconscious self is dominated by the human and the human needs without the awareness that there's something more profound connected to this human experience. It's actually experiencing itself through you.
Yeah,
Whereas the conscious self is very much aware that you're, for the most part, a complicated, but a vehicle for that consciousness to express. And insofar as you have the opportunity to align with the will of that higher self, the conscious self is joyous in the opportunity to be perfectly harmonized. with that will.
And this is part of the journey, part of the alignment, where it's actually aligning these two, um, we could say, strands or aspects of your being. Of the one, as you said, there is that essence of your being which actually remains unchanging, that has a certain joy in this process of living this incarnation, of having this experience, of growing, of learning, of developing, of being here in a way, let's say, enjoying a certain celebration of life. And then there's another strand of your consciousness, which we would term as the ego consciousness, that's very often in conflict with this witness consciousness of what we refer to as the self, because the ego consciousness is always seeking a more false or controlled fulfillment. It comes with expectations, wants to modulate reality somehow.
Okay. So then let me see if I can ask just based on what you said. So let me ask a few very direct questions. Do you believe that all here incarnate as humans chose to be here?
Yes, it's simple as that. I mean, it's actually leads into an interesting um, idea in here, because it's also something I observe with people who I meet. Some people I meet on the spiritual path, that it's really interesting that some people who start their spiritual journey start to reject the world somehow. And you hear them, I'm not from here. I want to go home. I don't belong here. Now, there may be a certain truth in that.
Yeah, could be very
There may
true.
be a certain truth in that, that yes, this is not our origins. This is just a place we've come to incarnate and inhabit in order to have certain necessary experiences. But if we're not careful, that rejection of what we don't like is actually just an ego mechanism, and it becomes an ego mechanism cloaked in spirituality. So it becomes a spiritual ego to say, no, I reject everything of the material world.
Somebody can say, I don't feel like I belong here, I'm not from here, and still say, but I'm not rejecting my being here.
Absolutely. In
Like
fact,
you,
that's the correct way, because if your soul, your higher self, chose to incarnate and take on a certain form, it also meant that it incarnated at a certain moment into a certain environment where the conditions were exactly right for you to learn very specific lessons and to have a very personal journey. And of course, there's a process. There's a process of forgetting some people, and that's always a risk. Some don't wake up, some get lost in the illusion, others wake up, and then it's okay. Then we have to kind of figure it out. What does it mean? What am I here to do?
so this is the so we've only really gotten going, but this is the first time now that we have a different perspective on something. That's first time it's come up within our conversations that we have a different
Okay.
perspective on something, which I think is great actually, because the more perspectives we can bring, the wider the net we cast.
Absolutely. So how do you see it?
Well, so I actually think that most that are here are pulled in. I think there is I think it's an enslaved planet, to be frank. And I even think that the concept of the ego is a way that spiritual teachers have tried to describe a technology, for lack of a better word, that actively degrades the spiritual experience as it enters into form.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in your purity, for example, you would have no trouble connecting with the knowing of the higher self, which would just be streaming through you and would just be experiencing the beauty and the pleasures of the human form. Because that's ultimately what I believe the human experience was intended to be: beautiful, incredible bountiful food and deep, passionate lovemaking and incredible connection to nature and all the adventures that come with exploration of the planet. And I think that that was the original design, but there was a fall. There was an event that happened where the light, which was so bright within the human incarnation cycle, ended up drawing in another, um, you could call it consciousness, or another creation, which is coming from an opposite point within the universal construct. And that consciousness sought to feed off of the light of the human experience. And they did that by instituting a very well developed technology that actively interferes with your connection to your higher self. It's an insert. And that insert, which, if you think about yourself as having a connection to your source, you could call it a source connection, which by and large is like a tube of light that enters into the crown chakra and makes sure that the consciousness is streaming into the human experience. There's an insert that interferes with that, actively feeds on that, and creates an experience whereby you can't see back to your origins. You can't feel into your source. But instead, it's a little bit like Narcismo that falls in love with his reflection. All that you experience then gets reflected back into the human consciousness, and you believe yourself to be disconnected and otherwise only ever human. And in that state of reality, the mind becomes dominant, the survival instinct takes over, and the individual becomes the priority. And now you're on this unfortunate treadmill where instead of coming here to experience the beauty of the incarnation, you end up getting captured by this technology, this enslaving technology, and you're now just pursuing more of the hedonistic and material needs that you think are necessary for your survival because you think yourself to only ever be this human self. And so that technology, for it to thrive, needs to pull in as much light as possible. It's feeding off of the light of your being. And the more people stay asleep, the more they are complicit with this technology. And so for me, as I went down this journey, I was so impressed by the ego because I was like, wow, at every turn, the ego finds a way to shape shift and to obfuscate and to deflect. And it's like so incredibly entrenching within the human experience. How is it that we came in as spiritual beings and yet almost everybody all around me in one way or another is consumed by these low vibrational tendencies? I just couldn't believe. And then even those that had done so much work on their ego, inevitably that ego was still showing itself at some point, even after a lifetime of effort. You know, like these great spiritualists that would get caught up with the material or get suckered in by the money like late in their journey. And I'm like, how did they get so duped? And then I came to realize that the technology is being reinforced by everything within the cultural sphere, within the technology space, on planet, the screens. It's being reinforced by a false earth grid. So the vibration of the planet has actively been commandeered. And then my consciousness really blew open. And I realized that a spiritual journey is awakening to the enslaving qualities of this reality and recognizing that this is not how it was designed to be.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not so different what you're saying, honestly. It's just maybe the referencing and framework is slightly different.
So I can tell you where I think the biggest difference is that the vast majority of those that are here have been caught up in this enslaved reality, and their low vibrational qualities have them stuck in a cycling because now they can't very well escape. And then there's a small percentage who have already completed the vibratory peril of this
Mhm.
type of dimension, who have since elevated much further in their journey, who have wandered back into this reality in an effort to be the light and to help others move down a liberated path to break out of the shackles of enslavement, which in by and large is an interface to the mind. They're enslaved in their own minds. Their whole priority structure is rooted in the reflection that's coming back into them that's reinforcing their low vibrational qualities.
I mean,
And
this
so
is very connected to the ideas in the spiritual traditions that refers to the exactly the enchaining to the wheel of reincarnation, because the whole process is and this is part of the at one level, and you can say when you were talking about in the beginning that the idea was that humanity came to celebrate life, to enjoy the richness and of love and lovemaking, and the well, the bounty and the plenitude and the abundance that this planet actually offers for us. If we want to frame that within let's say a theological reference point, then this is what we refer to as the Edenic phase of life.
That was Eden.
Eden, exactly. That was Eden. And from there, of course, the duality that appeared was the duality of temptation, which was exactly the forbidden fruit and the whole idea of the serpent and the eating of the forbidden fruit, and the serpent therefore representing Satan, representing the great deceiver, the great tempter.
That's right.
And therefore, after what happened then is that the feeding, and here maybe we differ slightly also, the feeding for me is not on the light, but is actually, I mean, you can say light in the broadest terms, but actually it's in the lower vibrations of the more negative tendencies of consciousness that started to become nourished. And we can talk about things like shame, fear, instinctual desire, violence, all kinds of things that we know that are negative behaviors or things that would be classed as part of the 7 deadly sins. And there was a descent of consciousness, which basically created the separation between the spiritual and the material realm. And it's also connected to these cycles that they speak about in the Hindu tradition when they speak about the yugas, that now we're in the darkest age, which is considered as to be the technological age, where we are the most disconnected and the most separated. And absolutely alongside that, without a doubt, there is a technology that nourishes the lower vibration so that you are enshackled. Your soul becomes enshackled in those lower vibrations, which then we refer to as things, as we call them, samskaras. So that when the body leaves, it only leaves so far because it's still chained by certain desires of a lower vibration that it's not released itself from yet.
That's right. Wherever your vibration is on your last breath, that defines your entry point for the next incarnation.
Pretty much.
And so, conversation, which will go on and on and on. I think there's going to be different iterations of it. So, in my understanding, as it's come to me, you have the insert or the slave self, which is ultimately creating actually a sense of security for the incarnate because it makes them feel like they know who they are. It creates an identity structure. Whereas spirit entered in a state of fluidity with non identities, just seeking an experience. And so, insofar as the higher self just desired to be all that is the joy of the human realm, it had no interest in identifying, it doesn't identify by its nature with any of the undertakings of the physical realm. But this technology actively returns back to you your thoughts and feelings, words and actions as if they are you. And so if somebody's grown up in a privileged home and they went to private schools and they were Ivy League educated and now they're working as a banker, they've created an image of themselves, which is rooted in this identity structure. That identity structure is the encapsulation technology, which allows you otherwise to feel safe and secure with who you, because in the realm that if you were just purely of spirit, you wouldn't really have in any ways a connection to anything around you. You'd be very pure in your reality. But the realm itself has been architected to encourage you to identify with everything.
Absolutely. But this is just part of the energetic structure that makes up your human incarnation.
But that technology is leaving, actually breaking down. So when people talk about this ascension and there's more consciousness coming in, what's happening is that the vibration of the planet is moving higher, and the grip that that technology has on all of us is now weakening, which is allowing for more of the light of our being or the consciousness that's incarnated within us to unobstructed. So people for so long, they're like, geez, I had this real shit job my whole life, and now I got to a point where I just can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Or I thought this way for many, many years around what it meant to be a good person. And now I realize that that was really nothing more than just some false projection that came to me through my parents or through the community. And so now they're called into that state of questioning. And that's largely because the technology itself and its coordinates have deleted. And as the vibration is moving higher and higher and higher, the other part of that mechanism, and even those that are incarnate, which are perpetrating that technology, they're doing everything they can to overcompensate for it, to try to lower the vibration of the planet and to bring us deeper
Absolutely.
and deeper
You
into
see,
this construct that's otherwise slave.
how I would define this is slightly different. I wouldn't refer to it as, when we talk about part of the human structure, as a technological insert, because there isn't some kind of object that's inserted into us. It's actually more the a certain energetic layer, which is related to what we would refer to as the ego consciousness, which you'll concede that the ego consciousness is the one that identifies with very quickly and very readily that this is my experience. These are my desires. Yeah. Now, the technology, and this is how I see it, the technology is exactly all of those things that exist throughout history, but increasingly in modern society, that push lots of energy towards reinforcing that energetic structure and making it more and more opaque. So it basically, by making it opaque, it creates that blockage to the higher sphere of consciousness or the higher self. So all of these things, like you see, like 15
Kardashians,
minutes of
all the
fame.
reality.
Yeah, like the latest star, America's Got Talent or whatever, or the UK's Got Talent, all of these kind of things, which are really and your job and your status and so many things, structures of society and the technologies of society, the social media, the smartphones, the all of this are all transmitting lots and lots of, let's say, tempting energy that reinforce the ego consciousness, while you're very, very strongly identified with your persona.
I fully and completely agree there. And I think that's very deliberate. I think that's part of the design.